The story begins as a man named Paul operates a projector in a movie theater. After everyone starts enjoying the movie, he begins reading a mystery book. In the book, he reads a story of a colony that existed on an island a long time ago, but in the 16th century, it disappeared out of nowhere. As time passes, he gets sleepy, and to fight off sleepiness, he wears a small light on his head and then goes outside. There, he flirts with a girl at the snack counter, and after that, he goes back to his room. Out of the blue, all the electricity in the theater goes out, making everything dark and quiet. A few seconds later, some emergency lights turn on, but surprisingly, everyone who was in the theater, except for Paul, has disappeared. Their clothes, glasses, shoes, and stuff are all left behind. While Paul tries to figure out what's going on, he meets a security guard with a flashlight. However, strangely, the guard goes into a restroom because he hears a noise, and then he also disappears. In a hospital, Dr. Rosemary also faces a similar situation as everyone around her has disappeared. She uses her flashlight to look around but doesn't get any response. Eventually, she finds an operating room with emergency lights on, and there's a patient on the table who seems to be asleep because of anesthesia. The doctor who was operating on him also vanished in the middle of the operation. The lights go out once more, and this time, the patient disappears too. Rosemary gets worried for her baby boy, Manny, so she starts calling for him. The next day, another person named Luke wakes up in a room decorated with candles that his girlfriend, Paige, had lit for a special evening. However, he notices that Paige hasn't come back home, and he doesn't realize anything strange is going on in the world. He then gets ready for his office. When he goes outside, he sees empty cars on the streets, finding no one around, which puzzles him. Suddenly, a plane crashes far away as there is no one to control it. In Luke's office, he sees a dark shadow slowly covering the last bit of light in the hallway, making it even darker. He goes to Paige's office to look for her, but she's not there, and the dark shadow then covers her family photo. When he sees a shadow coming closer to his office door, everything turns completely dark, but he still manages to drag the curtains of a window to let in some light, which saves his life. 3 days later, Luke walks around the dark city streets at night. He carries a big flashlight and some smaller lights around his neck while checking out the cars, hoping to find one that can still work. Frustrated, he takes a little rest in the last car, but then he hears someone yelling outside. He gets scared and closes the car door. Suddenly, a man shows up and asks for a flashlight because his lighter doesn't work anymore. Luke doesn't help him, and as the flame on the lighter fades away, the man is taken by the darkness. Luke gets out of the car, looks for supplies in the streets, and keeps going on his journey. Meanwhile, a young girl with a pink flashlight quietly follows Luke. He eventually finds a truck that has some electricity left, but it's not enough to make it move, so he collects batteries and a gun. Suddenly, he hears music in the distance, and following the sound, he finds a pub that's still lit up, even though the rest of the city is empty. When he goes inside, he discovers nothing but emptiness. Inside the pub, Luke looks around and finds a generator hidden in the basement. Just then, a 12-year-old boy named James shows up, holding a loaded shotgun, and he tells Luke to go upstairs. James shoots a warning shot at the wall, making Luke angry. But then Luke realizes that James is scared, so he asks for a drink and starts talking to him about their situation. While they have some drinks, Luke finds out that James is waiting for his mom. She went to the church to find a source of light, but she's been gone for a long time. Luke sadly says that she might not come back because the days are getting shorter due to a strange phenomenon that is causing eternal darkness to spread everywhere. Even though it looks really dark outside, the clock says it's 11 o'clock in the morning. Luke says they should leave before the generator runs out of power, but James decides to stay where they are because his mom said so. Suddenly, Dr. Rosemary comes into the pub, searching for her son, and when she can't find him, she shoots at Luke, but he manages to survive. At the same time, Paul is on the street with a bleeding head, but he manages to crawl into a shed that has some light, trying to find safety. In the pub, Rosemary finally relaxes and tells her story about what happened since people started disappearing mysteriously. At that time, she was about to light a cigarette, and when she came back home from the hospital, she found out that her nanny and her baby were gone. She thought Manny's dad must have taken him and brought him to the pub, which he used to go to often. While they're talking, they hear Paul yelling from outside. At first, Luke is unsure, but then he decides to go help Paul when Rosemary and James insist. As Luke goes towards Paul, he sees the shadows of a man on the street, and then he finds Paul lying on a bench at a bus stop. Luke's flashlight suddenly goes dark just as he's about to carry Paul back to the pub. Suddenly, he uses a sparkler to light the way, gets Paul, and hurries back. But during their escape, Luke hurts his ankle. Nonetheless, Rosemary opens the door to the pub, and they enter. Inside, Rosemary helps Paul with his head injury, and Luke wraps up his injured leg. Paul tells them how his light went out because of something strange, and when it came back on, he felt like he was in a different place. Paul explains that when the darkness surrounded him, he could barely hear voices. Later, they talk about their ideas about what's happening, but everyone has a different theory that doesn't match with the other one. Rosemary strongly says it might be a punishment from God. This upsets Luke, and he grabs James, asking Rosemary if the young boy deserves such a punishment. Luke keeps arguing his point when suddenly the light starts flickering. Paul suggests they should use less electricity in the pub to save power from the generator. While they are in the basement, they see a locked door next to the generator, and James says it's an emergency exit. Paul kicks the generator a few times, which makes the light flicker again. After the generator gets back to normal, Paul starts telling a story about a colony named Roanoke, which disappeared many centuries ago. In the year 1587, there was a settlement on an island called Roanoke in North Carolina. When a ship came to bring them supplies, they saw that everyone in the community had disappeared completely. The only thing they found was the word Croatoan carved on a wooden post. Paul thinks that maybe they did something to upset someone or something, and as a consequence, the whole town vanished. Suddenly, Paul falls down due to his injuries, and they put him on the pool table. Rosemary helps him and asks Luke for an ice pack. While Luke gets the ice pack, he recalls the time when he saw a shadow in his office hallway. He went after the shadow and found Paige's dress on the floor in the newsroom. When the power came back, he watched a video that showed Paige slowly disappearing. Then he got a live message from a reporter in Chicago who claimed to have heard Luke's dead brother's voice coming from the darkness. The reporter told people to stay in the light and suggested they come to Chicago to find him. After that, the electricity went out again. While Luke searched for light, he heard Paige's voice coming from the hallway. He saw strange ghost-like figures, so he quickly went back to his office. There, he pulled down the window blinds immediately, letting in lots of sunlight, which made the weird shadows disappear.
In the pub, Luke thinks that they should leave the place since the generator isn't reliable. He tells them about the broadcast he heard and suggests they all go to Chicago. He found a truck that he thought could take them there, and they could use the generator to give it the power it needed to start. But Rosemary doesn't want to go unless she finds her baby, and James isn't sure about leaving without his mom. Luke convinces them so much that they finally agree to go with him. Luke and Rosemary ask James to look after Paul while they bring the truck inside the pub. While Rosemary takes care of Paul's bandages, he asks if he has a chance with someone as pretty as her. Rosemary responds by giving him a kiss and then puts a glowing necklace around James' neck before going away. Outside, Rosemary's flashlight starts flickering and then completely goes out, even though she just put in new batteries. Luke notices that, except for the solar-powered lights, the rest of the electricity is getting weaker and they need more power. Nonetheless, they work together to push the truck back into the pub. Inside the pub, Paul, who is in immense pain, asks James to play a song on the jukebox. James does that and then goes to the bathroom to get something cold to help Paul. But for a little while, the lights go out, and when they come back on, Paul calls for James. At the same time, Luke deals with his broken ankle, and he and Rosemary take a break. Suddenly, the young girl comes back and points her light at them, but the dark shadow shows up again, scaring the girl, and she runs away. Luke tries to follow her, but his hurt ankle makes him trip. Strange ghost-like shadows start showing up, and Rosemary turns on the car's headlights, which saves them. On the other hand, James doesn't answer Paul's call, so Paul stands up and looks for him. He finds James' glowing necklace on the floor and thinks James might be in the basement. Outside, the truck's headlights start getting dimmed, and luckily, they're close to the hospital where Rosemary works, so she takes Luke inside and starts searching for a light source. Meanwhile, in the basement, Paul finds a long hallway with round lights and hears James calling for help. He follows James' voice and sees a door at the end of the hallway. When he goes to open it, he finds that it's just a wall made of bricks. This makes him really frustrated, and he starts hitting the wall over and over until the lights start going out one by one. Paul falls to the floor, and the darkness surrounds him, but he keeps saying "I exist" repeatedly. In reality, Paul is still on the pool table, calling for James, while James is in the restroom, wearing his glowing necklace. James comes back with a cold pack for Paul, but all he finds is Paul's clothes. At the hospital, Rosemary quickly finds a lighter and uses it to light Luke's torch. Then, she goes to the storage room to get some alcohol to keep the torch burning. She then hears the sound of a baby crying and sees a baby stroller under a street light. As she goes near it, she finds there's no baby inside. She realizes that she's been tricked, and despite Luke's attempt to save her from darkness, Rosemary is eventually engulfed just like everyone else. Luke goes back to the truck and attaches the torch to it to keep the darkness away while he pushes the truck by himself. Even though his leg hurts, he manages to get back to the pub with the pickup truck. He and James quickly connect it to the generator. As soon as the truck starts, Luke jumps into it just when the pub loses power. He tells James to keep his foot on the gas pedal to keep the truck's engine running while he fixes the hood that was causing a problem. But when Luke is fixing the hood, James sees the church where he thinks his mom is. Even though Luke told him not to, James gets out of the truck and goes to the church. Luke leaves James behind, or else the truck's engine will stop working. As he goes towards Chicago, Luke stops when he sees a big sign that says Croatoan on a bridge.
At the same time, as James goes into the church, he sees kennels and hears his mom's voice calling him from the darkness. While he's looking for his mom, a figure appears behind him, getting ready to cover him in darkness. Suddenly, Luke bursts into the church, and the light saves James. Luke tries to convince James again to go with him, but James thinks his mom is right there at the altar. But when James looks at the altar, all he finds is a pile of clothes. Unexpectedly, the car's headlights turn off, and Luke gets engulfed in the darkness as he tries to go after James. The dark shadows slowly come into the church, and James is in the middle of the kennels, saying, "I exist," over and over again. But then, all the kennels go out, and they are in complete darkness. At last, the sun rises, and surprisingly, James wakes up, and he's surrounded by kennels that aren't lit. The little girl named Brianna shows up again and begs James to stay with her. Brianna has managed to stay safe because she has a flashlight that runs on solar power. But James knows that when the sun goes down, the flashlight won't work anymore. They both leave the church together and see a horse eating apples that have fallen on the ground. They get on the horse and decide to ride it all the way to Chicago. When they leave the city, the sun sets, and they see shadows that look like Luke, Paul, and Rosemary, as if they are watching James and Brianna. Later, in the darkness, Brianna's light turns on, and it keeps them safe as they start their trip in search of a safe place.